I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters. The only weekly, serialized sword and sorcery podcast in existence. I write each episode myself, and then I record them all in one single, flawless take. Just like the Scandinavian bards known as skalds would have done it. This episode picks up right where episode 94 left off. But seriously, trust me on this. You do not have to start at the beginning to enjoy Skald. Instead, just jump right in here with the best episode yet. Then, once you're hooked, you've got a bunch of options. You can go back and listen to previous episodes on the podcast feeds. You can check them out via my daily re-releases on the SKALD YouTube page. You can pick up the prose volumes on Amazon, or you can just wait until next week when the new best episode ever, number 96, hits. It's totally up to you. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 95. He sat at his desk, scowling, his brow knitted as he stared ahead at the blank page. And as he did, it stared back, mocking him, laughing at his inability to fill it, his failure to do the work that he needed to do, his failure to do the work that he told himself he wanted to do, but despite that fact, simply would not come. He brushed back his hair, pushing those long, tangled curls out of his face, pushing them back, not because they impeded him, not because they hindered his non-existent progress, but rather because it was something to do. It was anything to do. It was a distraction, a momentary respite from the agony of inaction, the torture of being unable to force himself to do what he knew he should. He was surrounded by them, surrounded by distractions. Some foisted upon him, unavoidable, the cries and the requests and the demands and the needs of those in his life. But they were easily managed, easily tended to, or, on occasion, ignored, set aside until a more convenient time. No, the real problem, the real distractions, they were those that he had created for himself. Those that he set up under the auspices of facilitating his work, of drawing what needed to be done out of him, of forcing it out onto the page. He arched his back, stretching his taut muscles, letting the music wash over him. Heavy, oppressive rhythms, more dirge than song. Music that he claimed receded into the background, that he claimed helped him work, helped him write, helped him create. He claimed. But the truth was something else. The truth was that the music made no difference. He could block that heavy, fuzzy dirge out as easily as any other tune. Or, conversely, he could lose himself in it, as he did then, closing his eyes as he stretched his neck back and forth slowly. As he stretched his neck, sore from the unnatural position he so frequently took, hunched over his desk, his tired, bored eyes opened, and they looked around the room, looked at the art on the walls, meant to inspire him, looked at the slowly burning candles, intended to conjure up some creative spirit, a muse meant to evoke some inspirational deity who would come to him and simply give him what he needed, who would make his work easy, would make that creative birth a painless one. He let his mind wander as he thought about the entity he would summon, thought of how it would appear to him. Could he see it? Would he want to see it? Could his mind possibly comprehend a being of such purity, a deity that existed in a form deeper and more profound than any corporeal body? He fantasized about it. He lusted after it. He ached for his work to be done, for it to have been done. He longed for any way that he could do what he wanted, do what he needed to do, without doing the hard, back-breaking, soul-shaking work that it required. Uninspired, unmoved, he turned back to his work, to the work that he ached to do but dreaded beginning. He turned back to that empty page on that glowing screen. He knew what was meant to go there. It was in his head, and it was somewhere deeper. It was buried within him. The story had taken root, and it had blossomed. It had even begun to bear fruits, strange, acidic fruits that tasted sweet on his tongue, but that once swallowed, once devoured, ate away at his stomach. He leaned forward once again, hunching himself over his desk, staring at the glowing screen, hoping that it would hypnotize him, that it would allow him to enter a trance, a fugue state in which it would be easy, it would be simple, it would be painless to do what he needed to do what he reminded himself he wanted to do, what he claimed he wanted to do, what he would do if he was not, he reminded himself, so lazy, so cowardly, so craven. He ran his fingers over the keys, the simple instrument with which he could conjure up worlds, with which he could summon armies and monsters and send them crashing headlong into one another. He had done it before, and now, attempting to motivate himself, he would do it again. He knew he would. He had to. He wanted to. But it was just so very difficult. He abandoned the keys once again, abandoned his peerless tool of creation. He placed his elbows on the desk. He lowered his head, pressing the heels of his palms against his eyelids, applying pressure just enough that the colors came to him, bright and vivid, but dark and unknowable. They exploded behind his eyelids, bringing an intangible joy, an otherworldly hope to the darkness into which he had plunged himself. He began to breathe heavily, not because there was anything wrong, nothing wrong that he couldn't avoid, no ailment that he himself couldn't solve. His chest rose and fell, quicker and quicker. Nerves, panic, anxiety. He let out a sardonic laugh because he knew exactly who was to blame. He knew exactly who to blame. Himself. He only had himself to blame, because all he had to do was that which he knew he should do, that which he needed to do, that which he wanted to do and claimed that he wanted to do, that which he had done before and, God's willing, would do again. He felt the heartburn grow inside him, or he thought he did. He thought he felt it twist inside his gut, the effects of that strange fruit, the one that he had grown and cultivated, had brought forth into existence through an arcane botany. If he was racked by heartburn, if he was afflicted, if he was struck with illness, certainly he couldn't write. Certainly, he couldn't work, couldn't create, couldn't do his job, couldn't do what needed to be done, what he was meant to do, right? Wasn't that right? Didn't he need to be in the right state of mind to create worlds? Didn't his act of creation need to come from a place of ecstatic joy, not one of begrudging obligation? Was this his excuse? Was this his way out? Was this a reason to give up work for the night, to leave it until the next day when hopefully inspiration would strike, would invigorate him? No. The answer, as always, was no. Because that phantom illness, that artificial panic, was all his doing. It was all created by him. They were just more excuses, just more reasons not to work, not to do that which he knew he must, that which he wanted to do, wanted to have done more than anything in the world. No. It was all on him. It was all his doing, his need to work, to write, to create, to do that which he wanted to do more than anything. And the ability to do it, it was his as well. It had always been his, and the choice to do it, the choice to push aside the distractions, the fear, the doubt, the cowardice, to put them aside and set about the work that he knew he needed to do. It was his choice. It had always been his choice. He didn't need anyone else to make his art. Didn't need those that had failed him, those that had gotten in his way, the false prophets that steered him down twisting, useless paths, the ones that gave him advice that he had foolishly followed. He didn't need any of them. He didn't need anyone. He didn't need a glimmering psychopomp to guide him. He didn't need a glowing muse to fill him with inspiration. He didn't need anything but his desire, his all-consuming lust to see his will made manifest, to do what he wanted, to do what he needed to do. He had found his inspiration. He had found his drive. He had found it, not in the world, not in his distractions, not in some conjured up deity that could bless him with an eagerness to create, a willingness to work. No, he had found it where it had always been, where he had found it countless times before. He had found it in a place that, for reasons that were unclear to him, was always the last place he searched. He had found his inspiration, had found his drive, and he had found it within himself, had found it waiting there, waiting for the final nudge, the final bit of fuel that would ignite his very being, that would cause his engines of creation to burn and spin riotously. Fully inspired, fully driven, an unnatural, disconcerting smile crept across his face, one that twisted the edges of his mouth upward as his lips pulled back to reveal what was less an expression of joy and more a baring of teeth, a lustful display like that of a predator ready to feed. He tore his eyes open, ready to work, ready to launch himself into the act of creation that he had wasted far too much time running from. But when he opened his eyes, with his countenance given over completely to that terrifying, threatening smile, he found another rictus grin staring right back at him. He gasped and began to stand, began to force himself up to his feet, and he stammered fearfully. How, I don't. But before he could finish his thought, before he could even form a thought, before he could hammer those disparate words into a coherent whole, that smile, that terrifying rictus grin was barreling toward him, driven by a thick, powerful body, one that he recognized, one that made his blood run cold because he knew it so very well, knew it intimately, a body that had been scorched and ravaged, a body covered in blue runes of eldritch power. Maul was home. He had arrived. He was finally there. Finally in his world. The world he would rule. The world he would reclaim as his own. He was finally there. In the realm of men. But that world, it was not one he recognized. It was not one that he had expected. It was not what he had wanted, had lusted after, had longed for. He had been ready for combat. He had been eager for struggle. He had been well prepared for strife. After all he had seen, after all he had suffered, he was ready to fight his way to the throne, to his throne, ready to water the earth with the blood of those who would oppose him, ready to crack bones and drink their marrow, ready to set fire to all of creation and to watch, laughing, as the smoke blotted out the sun. But upon his arrival, upon rematerializing there in the realm of men, after his trip across the sundered worlds, a trip facilitated by that cowardly, filthy cripple, the self-proclaimed vermin prince, he had not found conflict. He had not found combat or struggle or strife. All he found was decadence and cowardice. There, in a cramped room, filled to bursting with books and clothing, with walls covered in effete art, with more belongings than a man, a real man, a man of worth and character and value could ever need in 100 lifetimes. Maul found himself confronted with unearned decadence, with the world made too precious, made ineffectual and pretentious. His world had been ruined, had been left to rot, had been made soft from lack of struggle, from lack of conflict, from lack of necessity, from want, from need, from true, all-consuming desire. That world, his world, the world that was rightfully his, the realm of men, had been ruined, had been broken, had been shattered and abandoned. But Maul would be damned if he allowed it to be wasted for one moment longer. His course of action clear, his destiny open to him. He glanced around that small, cramped room, and as he did, his gaze fell upon its only other inhabitant. His hair was long and clean, too clean. His entire person was too clean. His clothes spotless from a lack of work. His skin clear and without scarring from a lifetime spent without struggle. He sat there in Maul's world, in Maul's home, idly, doing nothing, accomplishing nothing, surrounded by his books and his machines, surrounded by wishes and daydreams, and producing nothing, nothing of value, accomplishing nothing, nothing of value. He sat there, an affront to that very realm and its impossible possibilities, an affront to its throne, an affront to its ruler, the one true king of men, the one true king of flames and ashes, King Maul. What kind of man was this before him? What kind of sad excuse for the iron that composed a true man, for the fearlessness that filled a man of action, a man of cause, a man of needs, desires, and demands? What kind of shameful display was this before him? What kind of man was this meant to be? Maul smiled, allowed that rictus grin to retake its place upon his visage as he decided upon the answer. What type of man was this? One that did not deserve to draw breath in Maul's world. No sooner had the man, that coward, that feckless waste of flesh, no sooner had he opened his glassy, terrified eyes, no sooner had he been stricken by the fear that lay at the core of him, that catalyzed his every motion, his every thought, his every hope and desire, no sooner had he begun to scramble, confused and terrified, to his feet. And Maul was upon him. Could have killed him in any number of ways. His cudgel, his fists, even that long, twisting alabaster horn, the one that he felt growing warm against his chest where it hung from that simple leather strap. But none of them felt right for that coward, that fool, that worthless chaff of humanity, that despicably effete excuse for a man that, despite his worthlessness, despite his shameful, pointless existence, possessed something that Maul recognized. Possessed something that Maul knew intimately. He had an anger and a rage and a hatred at his very core. The same anger and rage and hatred that drove Maul, but that had failed to motivate, failed to inspire this lazy, craven fool. That drive, that inspiration, that hungry, cathartic flame was wasted on one such as him. And once again, Maul found himself offended, found himself infuriated by this callous affront. So, as he charged at the man, the one that stammered as he scrambled to his feet, as Maul barreled toward him, he decided that he would not bludgeon, would not punch, would not stab this cowardly imbecile. No. The worthless, there was still something of value within him. The flame of chaos burned brightly inside of him, and Maul knew exactly what he would do with it. He would devour it. He seized the man, grabbed his weak, fleshy arms, and dug his fire-hardened fingers into them. And as the man screamed, as he squealed like a pig dragged off to slaughter, Maul unhinged his jaw. He stretched his mouth open wide like some horrible snake, and he gobbled up that squirming, ineffectual man, swallowing him whole. The dying man writhed inside his belly, his arms and his legs flailing outward. Now, finally, fully animated, fully driven, fully motivated, fully inspired by the fire within them, by that cleansing blaze. The arms and the legs lashed out faster and faster, spinning inside of the brute, twirling and revolving as they were ground up by the savage's gut, until one became two, over and over and over again, and the spinning flame in the destroyer's gut had not 4 arms, but 8. Pleased with his work, pleased with the death that he dealt so quickly, so efficiently, Maul unleashed a vicious backswing, smashing his cudgel into that blowing screen, sending it flying across the room, colliding with the wall where it exploded in a shower of sparks and shards. He turned to the door. The flimsy white door that stood between him and the rest of the world, the rest of his world. But before he could kick it down, before he could burst through that thin, insufficient wood, the door opened, admitting a panic-stricken woman into the room, one that, upon seeing that hulking destroyer standing before her, began screaming and screeching. Not wishing to waste any more time, not wishing to waste another moment, Maul grabbed the woman's face and he shoved her to the floor. Let her stay there and cry up on the floor, because Maul had work to do. Work that he had to do. Work that he wanted to do. Work that after all this time, after a lifetime of agony, of denial, of having what was rightfully his withheld from him. Work that he was dying to do. He stormed through the next room, as crowded and cramped and filled with detritus as the last, and he charged toward the door. But this time, the door did not open itself. That portal did not emit another screeching woman. No, this time there was nothing to stop him from barreling into it, from driving his shoulder into the door, from forcing the flimsy wood off its hinges, from bursting forth into the open, into the outside world, into his world, into the world that he would see made his, or he would see burn as punishment. He stood there in the light, shielding his one good eye from that bright, shining yellow sun, the one that stared angrily down at him, that shone so bright, so roughly, that he felt it prick his skin, felt the runes moving faster and more frantically, more dangerously and more demandingly within its light. And when his eye adjusted, when his one working pupil shrank so as to not let in so much of that rejuvenating light, Maul was aghast at what confronted him. It was a city, a massive, sprawling, towering city, a city that put even Ravana to shame. A city of steel and stone and machines that covered the streets like massive insects, their metal carapaces concealing their inner workings, the ones that ground and churned so as to prevent the city's inhabitants, its soft, cowardly inhabitants, its feckless, effete inhabitants, to prevent them from dirtying their hands, from forming calluses, from doing what they should do, what they must do, what they were too scared, too craven, too lazy to actually do. Maul began to breathe heavily. He felt panic, felt anxiety, felt nausea take hold in the pit of his stomach and start to crawl up into his chest. Felt a scorching heartburn boiling beneath his solar plexus. This world, his world, it had been ruined, it had been sullied, it had been tainted and defiled. In his absence, the fruits of this world had gone to rot. The streets had filled with filth, and the flies circled and the maggots crawled. His world had been tainted, had been ruined, and the throne that sat at its head, his throne, had been defiled, had been befouled, had been blighted. As he stood there, clenching his teeth, flexing his muscles, he felt the panic change, felt the anxiety morph, felt the nausea give way to something else. Hatred. It was the anger. It was the rage that had always fueled him, had always empowered him to do what he needed to do. His world had been corrupted, but still, it was his. It was his world and no one else's. It was his birthright, and he had killed and slaughtered and bled and wept and cried and suffered too much to forsake it, to simply give it up, to abandon the throne that still waited for him. No, he was the one true king of men. He was the one true king of flames and ashes, and there was only one thing that could cleanse that world, that could wash away the filth that crowded his realm, could scare away whatever usurper sat upon his throne, could cast down whatever tyrant had seized Maul's rightful place. There was only one thing to be done. There was only one thing that could be done. Only one thing that Maul wanted more than anything to do. So he raised his cudgel, and he sent it plummeting down toward the earth, sent it smashing into the ground, cracking the poured, unnaturally flat stone that covered the world for as far as he could see. He brought the cudgel down again and again. Like a man possessed, he beat the earth. He punished the world that had fallen apart in his absence. And as he did, with every single downward stroke of his cudgel, the world shifted and it roiled in response. The world, in obedience of its master, of its rightful king, it spasmed and it moved and it rose up beneath Maul's feet. Thanks for listening to the very best episode of SKALD yet. Each week, I like to read an iTunes review of the show. Not just as a way of bragging, though that's nice too, but rather to encourage you to go leave a review yourself. SKALD has no advertising budget, so iTunes reviews are the absolute best way to help spread the word about the show. Kleppy says, the only story that matters. This is by far the most epic podcast I have ever listened to. The ongoing plight of Maul has been nothing short of breathtaking. Every Tuesday is the highlight of my week, and I cannot wait to hear the next part. 5 stars is not enough for this epic, ongoing tale. I give it 10. SKALD is only made possible through the generosity of my Patreon supporters. Without them, I wouldn't be able to afford the show's podcasting fees, and it'd be even harder to justify all the time I spend on the show. If you enjoy SKALD, which I know you do the right thing and go to patreon.com/skald today. A few bucks a month makes it possible for me to keep this show going and growing. For more information on me, the SKALD Prose volumes, my comic book writing, signed copies of my work, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, my bio, contact information, social media, and more, head to aubreysitterson.com. Finally, my weekly recommendation. Embrace yourself, because once again, it's a self-serving one. By the time you hear this, it will have been out for almost a month, due entirely to the fact that I record SKALD way in advance and only recently started keeping track of when things are going to be coming out. But all that's beside the point, which is this. Go, right now, please, buy G.I. Joe #1. That's right, I'm the writer of the new ongoing G.I. Joe book with art by the amazing Yanni Milaniani. It's a great jumping on point, whether you're a longtime Joe fan or have never read a single issue. Obviously, it's very, very different from SKALD. But if you dig what I do here, I think you're going to love G.I. Joe. Find it in your local comic shop or digitally on Comixology. There's a link in the description for you. And look for issue #2 in stores in just a couple of weeks. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.